My son-in-law David became angry with my husband James because we had purchased a small bottle of red wine. Do you know how much gas I could have purchased with that money to fill up a whole tank? I've told you repeatedly to cut back on spending. And save wherever you can, but you also spend money carelessly on luxury items. My daughter Rachel added, I know you're upset, Mom. Why didn't you talk to me first? Do you think our finances can handle this? Handle you two spending this way? I watched James's face gradually lose its color as his expression darkened until all I could see was silent humiliation. My rage reached a breaking point, and I pointed straight at David's wristwatch, which cost him more than $6,000, and then at Rachel's handbag, which she proudly displayed to show off its value. At least $5,000. You two love to preach about saving money, don't you? Then tell me how much that watch cost, David and Rachel. What about the purse you're carrying? James and I receive almost $7,000 a month in retirement income, and now you're telling us we can't even enjoy a simple bottle of wine. Whose money are you so desperate to save? Whose lives are you trying to cut back? We worked our entire lives to provide you with a better life. On that day, when we went grocery shopping and happened to walk past a wine promotion, James stood in front of the red wine display for a long time with a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He had always had a sense of self-worth, but this wasn't the kind of old age we imagined being humiliated by our own children. Later that day, James and I quietly packed our things and left the house, and suddenly they panicked. Soft spot for those limited edition red wines with vintage labels, but in all the years we'd lived at Rachel's, he hardly touched a drop. A complex range of feelings arose inside me, so I went over and discreetly selected his favorite bottle, putting it in our shopping basket. Emily followed me, beginning to say something but pausing in the middle. I smiled gently at him, honey, because it's our wedding anniversary. After dinner, just as James was ready to open the bottle of good wine to celebrate, Rachel and David entered the room. The smell of alcohol filled the room as soon as the door opened, and David staggered into the living room, obviously intoxicated. I instantly scowled, an unwanted wave of annoyance rising in my chest, and he moved to the dining table before stopping. We hadn't had a drink together in a long time, so James thought we'd celebrate when David suddenly exploded that bottle, which cost enough to fill up my gas tank. James quickly tried to explain that it was on sale for just over $30, but David's face darkened and his voice remained stern. Then he turned and yelled at Rachel, asking why she wasn't keeping your parents in check. Rachel didn't think twice about jumping in, Dad, which was incredibly reckless. You know how tight things are, so why didn't you talk to me first? He was loud and cutting over $30, and you think that's cheap. I wouldn't even buy it for myself. I've been saying this all along, but you don't care about any of it. I saw James just moments ago, and his face was sinking into sadness. A spark ignited in my chest, and I got up and said calmly but firmly, I bought the wine, it had nothing. Right now, Owen is starting school soon, David's project is still short on funding. Money is going out in all directions, and you're wasting it on this. You keep talking about saving money, but what about your $6,000 watch, David, or your $5,000 purse, Rachel? Let's face it, those were charged to our retirement card. David tried to defend himself, but that's not the same as, I need the watch. I was shaking with rage, but what about James and me? We received almost $7,000 a month in retirement, and you're telling us we can't even enjoy a bottle of wine. Are you trying to budget, or are you just robbing us of our dignity? Rachel said, look professional for work. Unapologetic dad. She said. If I walked into the office with a cheap bag, people would laugh at me. James, terrified by the yelling, picked him up and tried to calm him down by saying, please don't fight, it's just a bottle of wine. If it's such a big deal, I'll see if the store will take it back tomorrow, I said icily, looking directly at Rachel and David. We're not at an age where we need to ask for permission to enjoy our lives and that wine, I said, because I earned it. If you want money, go earn it yourself. Don't hang your hopes on us. I took James by the hand and walked back to our room after saying, I really want to call yourself a daughter, then start acting like one. James never drank the bottle of wine, but the following morning he quietly gave it to our neighbors next door. Later that morning, David arrived, looking sheepish and apologetic. He muttered, I had too much to drink last night, and said a number of foolish things that I felt terrible. Then he slapped himself twice and muttered, I'm a damn fool. Rachel, who was right behind him and had a look of exaggerated guilt, said, we didn't mean to be so harsh, Dad and Mom, please don't take it to heart. I snorted coldly at their forced smiles and overly theatrical apologies, not even bothering to look them in the eyes. My apathy instantly became sad. He turned to James' father. James sighed and patted my shoulder, saying softly, we're family, Emily. There's no need to hold on to grudges overnight. Let it go. His words helped to calm some of the fire in my chest, and Rachel swiftly seized the moment. It had been a while since we all went out together, and today is our day. When we arrived downtown, a vintage clothing store caught my attention. The display window featured a white dress with delicate blue floral patterns, and I couldn't help but linger. James noticed my eyes and laughed softly. "You like it?" I nodded. James, the peacemaker, seemed eager to rectify the situation and insisted that we join them. Opened the door right away and gently pushed me inside. The store was brimming with exquisite vintage gowns, graceful prints, and fine fabrics. The one I had been eyeing hung in the middle, and I walked over and ran my fingers over it, instantly falling in love with it. It was the exact style I used to love when I was younger, but ever since we moved in with Rachel and began taking care of Owen, I hadn't. If I had worn anything similar, I could still recall David sneering at me. "What are you trying to pull off wearing those floral dresses? It's not like you're on vacation." I stopped wearing them altogether after that, and James seemed to notice my hesitation. He waved to a store clerk, asking if he could help my wife find her size in this particular dress. I was hesitant because I'm getting old. "Look silly on me." James gave me a warm, steady smile and said, "You used to love this style, so why do you think it's not right for you now?" The clerk responded, "Every age has its own charm," adding that you have lovely skin and a graceful air and that this dress would look stunning on you. I entered the changing room, and as soon as I walked out wearing the dress, the clerk's eyes brightened and she clapped her hands. I turned to James, apprehensively, and he looked at me tenderly, his eyes as beautiful as ever. I stood in front of the mirror, gazing at the woman's reflection in that familiar dress, and I felt as though I had found a piece of myself again, my confidence, my grace. "Delight is so beautiful that it seems like it was made just for you." Rachel caught her breath and complained, "Ugh, this is exhausting, Mom and Dad. Why did you wander off like that? We've been searching all over, we're done shopping. Let's just head home." David was shaking his collar, obviously irritated and in no mood to be paid. The woman I'd almost forgotten was discovered just as I was about to pull out my card to pay Rachel and David. "Mom, at your age, is this really appropriate?" she said with a forced smile, her voice tinged with condescension. The smile on my face faltered as Rachel approached, and her eyes focused on the vintage floral dress I was wearing. She froze for a moment, her eyes widening as she scanned the store before marching over to the display rack and flipping through the price tags. "What's inappropriate about it?" James shot back with a cold chuckle. He pointed to the shopping bags in their hands and said, "It's totally reasonable for you to spend hundreds on whatever you want, but the moment your mother buys a dress, it's suddenly a problem." Rachel's expression changed instantly, and she quickly tucked the bags behind her back, forcing a smile in my direction. "Mom, I didn't mean it that way, I was just being honest. Considering that you're 65 and this dress is a little too gaudy for you, it doesn't exactly convey grace." She pointed to the passers-by outside and said, "Comfort is what matters, and besides, you're always cooking, doing laundry, and chasing after Owen. How is a dress like that even practical?" James's face hardened. "You ungrateful girl? Do you even remember why your mother cut her hair?" His words really got to me. Yes, I used to wear my hair long all the time, but when I started taking care of Owen, he would constantly grab it and tug at it until I winced. James reprimanded him for it. The store clerk promptly intervened to try to defuse the situation. In reality, short hair has its own elegance with a vintage dress like this one, making a woman's character stand out. Rachel and David couldn't care less about me. They were only concerned that the child might get scratched by my hair, and they even blamed me for it. I never grew it out again. He turned back to me. "Mom, I just passed a store earlier with clothes that looked really soft and lightweight, and they're on sale way cheaper than this stuff. That style might suit you better. We're walking past it anyway, let's just stop in and take a look." The clerk looked embarrassed, offered only a polite smile, and then quietly stepped back behind the counter. He laughed sarcastically. "Of course. You're trying to make a sale." Counter David also said, "Really, purchasing a dress like this is just a waste. You'd get more value putting that money towards some good whiskey or a few fine cigars for me." At that point, all I could feel was painstaking disappointment because it was so obvious that the bottle of wine, the dress, or anything else we might ever want to buy for ourselves would always be wasteful in their eyes. Only when the money was spent on them did it become reasonable or worthwhile. James was still arguing with them when I secretly entered the dressing room and changed back into my boring gray dress, which Rachel always described as appropriate and practical. When I emerged, the smile that had been on my face in the mirror moments before had vanished, leaving only a pale shadow. James noticed it, and his expression fell without a word. The moment he took out his wallet and gave our savings card to the store clerk, Rachel and David's expressions changed. I reached for James's hand, and he looked at me steadily and resolutely. After we paid, we left without turning around and silently stared out the window in the distance. As the sun began to slowly set behind the horizon, I turned to face James. The waning light gave his face a gentle, solemn gray, and my chest ached with a dull heaviness. I reached over and took his hand without thinking, and he looked at me in confusion. I gave him a little shake of my head. I'm fine, but I knew deep down that something in me had changed completely and irrevocably that night when Rachel and David went out again for another social dinner at the dinner table, just James and I, with Owen sitting close by watching cartoons and refusing to eat. James sat there silently, his plate untouched, his face clouded in silence, and I said softly, "James, go back home." He lifted his head, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Grandma, did you just say you're going somewhere? Are you moving out? Are you really leaving?" I paused for a second and smiled faintly. "Maybe, sweetheart, but why?" Owen froze for a moment, a flicker of light flashing in his eyes, but then it faded as if something suddenly came to mind and snuffed it out. I knew exactly what he was thinking in that moment. Owen clapped his hands and smiled. "Of course I'm excited. Once you leave, Grandpa Jay and Grandma Anna can come live here." He continued to be happy, oblivious to the chill that was settling over my heart. "They love me so much and always give me popcorn, Skittles, and soda when we visit their house, but you guys never buy that stuff," I heard Dad. When he said, "Once we move into the big house, you'll go back to your hometown, and then Grandpa Jay and Grandma Anna can come live here, so if you're leaving now, does that mean I get to see them sooner?" He bounced in place so excitedly that every word hit me like ice water. Jay and Anna David's parents were the grandparents Owen loved the most, but they weren't the ones who took care of him every day. One day, Rachel and David had intended to enroll Owen in that prestigious elementary school, but the cost of the homes close to the school was much higher than what they could afford, and even the money James and I had saved for a down payment wasn't enough. Their plan, I now realize, was to sell our old house back home to pay for the down payment, deplete our savings for renovations to the new home, and then, after they sold their current residence, use that money to pay off the mortgage. We only have one child, Rachel, and we always thought that everything we owned would eventually pass to her. It felt natural, even right, but David had never considered what would happen to us after our old house was sold. Where would we go? That house had been vacant for more than 10 years, and it was falling apart, probably making it uninhabitable. Now, I stared at Owen's beaming little face, and all I felt was cold. "Does your mom know about all this?" I asked softly, and Owen answered without hesitation. "Mom said that she's going to take Grandpa and Grandma out to explore the city because they've never been here before." That night, James and I ate in silence, and Rachel and David returned home late. I heard the noise in the living room, so I knew that I had obviously been drinking because I sat in bed for a long time, spinning things around in my head until at last my thoughts became clear and sharp. I couldn't sleep, so I kept turning over and looking at James. "Do you remember what we used to discuss before retirement?" I reached up and lightly brushed the silver strands at his temple, then I leaned in and whispered in his ear, and James froze, his eyes suddenly wide with surprise. The old house we listed with a real estate agency finally found a buyer, and Rachel and David were ecstatic with the news. They practically buzzed with excitement when I told them that James and I would be handling the sale in person, and they agreed without hesitation. I simply gave him a quiet smile and held his hand tighter. No more words were needed. With their hopeful eyes on us, David even offered to drive us to the airport right before we left. Rachel kept reminding us not to worry about Owen and to wrap up business as soon as possible so we could complete the sale. David gave me a bank card and said, "Have the buyer transfer the payment to this account, it's going toward the new house anyway." James and I left for our hometown, but before we could board, I threw that bank card into a trash can. Opening a new bank account and routing our retirement funds there was the first thing we did when we returned from the airport. Over the next few days, we completed the sale of the house and got rid of everything we had left behind, save for a few old jackets that James had always loved. 2 weeks later, the southern coast was warm and breezy, and in the evening, James and I sat on the porch of the small cottage we had rented, enjoying freshly brewed coffee. When James's phone rang while they were having dinner, it was Rachel. He answered, and before he could say anything, her voice came over the line, irritated. "Dad, it's been 2 weeks. Has the house sold or not? When are you coming back?" She said frantically. "We've already chosen the new place, but it's a hot market. The agents are only holding it for a few more days." We practically begged for she hesitated for a moment before continuing, "If you don't sign the contract soon, we're going to lose it. By the way, your retirement money didn't come through this month. You'd better call the bank and find out what went wrong." James calmly put down his utensils and wiped his mouth with a napkin before responding. "Oh, right," he said casually. "There's something we forgot to tell you. Your mother and I decided to take a trip." After a pause, she said, "We're not coming back." What, you're not coming back? Ask for that new house you want. James' tone remained steady. We don't think it's necessary, especially since you don't really have the savings to afford it, do you? That retirement check you're asking about went through just fine, but not to the account you're thinking of. We've changed it to silence. Rachel's voice came back a few seconds later, now sharp and shrill, and James pulled the phone away from his ear a little, but her words were still very clear. What are you talking about? He yelled. Now, Dad, answer me. Mom, are you there? The house isn't sold, you're not coming back, you've moved the retirement money, what are we supposed to do? James hung up without saying anything. The phone also lit up, but James reached over, declined the call, and put the phone on silent. I hesitated for a moment, then I asked James quietly, are we really doing the right thing? I sighed deeply. I know what you're worried about. You're thinking you've given her everything she asked for without hesitation for years. I used to think that was just what parents do, but they've made it very clear that our kindness means nothing to them. If we gave them our house and our retirement funds, do you really think we'd have a place in their future? She's our only daughter, the child we poured our love into, the hope of our lives, everything we saved, everything we worked for, it all felt like it should go to her. I sat in silence for a long time, and his words kept repeating in my head. He said, we give up everything out of fear of aging, fear of illness, and fear of death, so we convince ourselves that it's safer to depend on them to hand over control and hope they'll carry us through, but what do we get in return? Do you really think it would have been better than this? When James saw me standing tall once more and with a quiet confidence in my posture, he finally let out a long breath of relief. From that day on, the world gained a pair of sunset companions. A couple who had completely walked away from the chaos of family. I sat alone in the yard for a long time as the last touches of sunset faded into the horizon and night slowly crept in. The following morning, I brushed my hair neatly and put on my favorite dress. Living simply and exclusively for themselves, they rented a small, comfortable home with a garden in a quiet, warm town in the south, just a short distance from a serene, shimmering lake. Every morning, we would stroll along the lake's edge, occasionally jogging or biking, and then head to the nearby farm market to select fresh food for the day. If we had extra time after the market, we would then get in the car and drive to nearby towns with wooded trails or serene bays. I started taking care of myself again after 4 years at Rachel's. I had worn loose, stripy clothes and had my hair cut short for convenience only, but now I let it grow out again. I told James that I didn't mind the ease of having short hair. James would wear his favorite relaxed button-down shirts and wide-brimmed hat, and I would bring along my camera to capture the calm and grace that now rested between his eyes. I started pinning my long hair up in the stylish Sean. I used to love wearing it with my favorite vintage dresses, but I missed the softness and grace of it as it reached the nape of my neck. James would always look at me and say, "You're even more beautiful now than you were back then," and he would say, after lunch, we take a short nap. In the afternoons, James would curl up by the window with a book while I lost myself and we each slipped into our own little worlds while learning photography and video editing, and before we knew it, the entire afternoon would pass in silence. Every few weeks, we went on a quick trip to explore small towns, quiet harbors, and coastal roads. Our footprints gradually marked the map of all the places we had visited together. On one of those trips, we met a young man named Chris, a traveling content creator, and out of curiosity, I looked up his social media accounts. We laughed when he quickly declared himself his biggest fan on his social media account, which had over 20 million followers. He begged me to allow him to call me his godmother, saying, "I always thought vintage style belonged to people like my mom, but meeting you made me realize true style is something you live, not just where his mother and grandmother had been passionate about vintage culture." Since then, I have not only been the focus of James's subdued photos but also the muse in Chris's colorful lens. With my consent, he shared a few videos of us online, and to everyone's amazement, the videos went viral. It was because of those clips, those soft, quiet glimpses of our lives, that Rachel and David, after more than 6 months of at last, silence came searching for us. They arrived bloodshot-eyed and exhausted, obviously having had little to no sleep the night before. Over the previous 6 months, Rachel and David had called and texted me numerous times, and I had ignored them all, so their terrified expressions didn't surprise me in the least. Dad, Rachel hurried in when the door opened, her voice was urgent and strained, and her face was twisted with a tangle of emotions. "You and Mom simply vanished without a word. We've been looking everywhere, even going back to the old house, which has since been sold, and you're still not returning." Why didn't David say anything? He just walked out to the garden and sat down in a chair, as if the act of discovering you had solved everything. After that, I went outside and sat down at the table. Rachel looked at me for a few seconds before she finally spoke, and then David, who had been slouched in the chair, suddenly straightened up. His eyes flicked to James and then to me, where he scratched his head awkwardly. It's great to see you again, Catherine, you look younger than ever. I hardly recognized you, and I gave you a cold. Snorted and said, if you have anything to say, say it. We're going to the morning market soon. Only then did Rachel and David appear to realize that we weren't in the mood for small talk. Rachel leaped to her feet, telling the market to let her pack up and leave already. It's been more than 6 months since you lost your chance on the last house we chose, and it's gone. We've just found another one that's good but not quite as nice. They didn't come to see us, they came to see the money I smeared inside of me. I didn't bother to respond, so David gave Rachel a subtle look, but she quickly realized and slid over next to me, putting her arm through mine with forced affection. Mom, are you still upset about the dress I swear I had? I'm not sure how much. You loved vintage styles, and you look amazing in them. If you want, I can get you a few different styles every season to mix things up. Alright, he paused and sighed. Owen has been crying every day, saying that he misses you too. He's barely eating and has lost weight. It's heartbreaking. You raised him from the beginning, and he can't live without you. Don't you care? I smiled. I said softly, you should go, as I walked calmly over to the garden gate. My voice was cool and sharp, and I said, finally, if you like a dress, I can buy it myself. As for Owen, there are other people in his life who can love him. All I want now is to spend the rest of my days peacefully with your dad. Finally. I said, live within your means if you want a house, pay for it. You're really cutting us off. What happens when you're old and sick? Who will take care of you? We never counted on you for that. I said it plainly, waving my hand as if swatting away, and then I turned to David. Rachel froze for a moment before jumping to her feet, her face flushed with frustration, her voice rising with hostility. You've brought your parents over, haven't you? He blinked in surprise, gave me a sidelong glance, and then slowly nodded. I laughed softly, knowing that you didn't even need to ask. We came together on our own, and now that your entire small family is back together early, I'm sure Owens is ecstatic. His eyes widened in shock, and his whole body went pale. Rachel's face turned pale. Her expression was the same as his, and he was stunned and unable to speak. Then, a familiar voice called out at the gate, Hey, Catherine James, weren't we supposed to go to the farmer's market together this morning? Chris arrived at the entrance smiling and entered the garden. He froze for a moment before quickly piecing together why Rachel and David didn't go to the market today. He then turned to face me with a broad smile. Kath, aren't you going to introduce me to your friends? David's face was instantly twisted with anger. Oh, I see how it is. He spat out a bitter laugh and jabbed a finger in Chris's direction. It's no wonder you two don't want to return home, you've been totally captivated by this punk. You think I don't understand what's happening here, you cuddling up to 2 elderly people. Pretending to be all sweet, don't think I don't know what you're after. You're after their money, aren't you? You don't even know whose money that is. You have some nerve, you little leech. Then, like a bull seeing red, David charged directly at Chris, making my heart race. David was tall and heavy-set, and Chris, despite being young, was wiry and lean. If it came to a fight, I wasn't sure he could handle it, so I started to get up to intervene, then there was a loud, sharp thud. Chris flipped David over his shoulder and slammed him to the ground. David landed hard and moaned in pain, sprawled across the garden, unable to get up. Chris dusted off his sleeves and looked down at him with a frown. That's all you have? James and I were frozen for a second, and then we both started laughing. Had believed that this quiet young man was such a powerhouse that Rachel and David were left completely humiliated and without anything to show for their resentment. A few days later, James and I packed our bags once more in preparation for our next adventure, but Chris brought us an invitation from his mother, who had seen my pictures and videos and had expressed a strong desire to meet me. We accepted it. Little thought, then gladly accepted. When we got to the seaside city and entered her house, I was shocked to learn that Chris's mother was a famous vintage fashion designer, Claire Stone, whom I had admired for years when I was still working. I had found one of her runway shows online and had been enthralled by the sophisticated silhouettes and intricate details. Ever since, I had secretly hoped to wear one of her creations. CLA and I clicked right away, talking extensively about vintage fashion, femininity, and the art of timeless style as she led me through her studio, stopping in front of a mannequin draped in a cloth with a proud gleam in her eyes. Life got in the way, family responsibilities took over, chores became endless, and that dream was gradually tucked away. Now, standing here, I felt nothing but gratitude for the decisions I'd made and had finally returned to living for myself. Lifted the fabric and said, this is the piece I'm most proud of, but ever since it was completed, I've never found the right person to wear it. I've tried models and celebrities, but none of them have ever embodied the spirit I had in mind. Then I saw you in Chris's video, and I knew this dress was made for you. The moment I slipped into that vintage dress, I could sense it too. It wasn't just about the fit. Claire immediately asked me to be the final model for her upcoming vintage runway show in that very dress, and I was thrilled and giddy like a young girl chasing her dream for the first time. It was a perfect balance of style and soul, and what had once seemed like an ordinary floral pattern came to life on me, radiating warmth and poise. To get ready, I practiced for 2 hours every day. Initially, James would watch me sweating and worry that I wasn't pushing myself too hard, but I would always smile and tell him that I've spent the majority of my life just getting by. For the first time, I feel alive. He stopped trying to talk me out of it and instead became my quiet support system, handling everything behind the scenes to make sure I had everything I needed. And on the day of the show, I walked the runway. As no one expected a woman over 60 to be the most radiant presence on stage as the closing act, but I wasn't anxious because my makeup was flawless, my steps were confident and graceful, and every movement was full of ease and confidence. The audience erupted in applause, and the cameras flashed, all of them focused on me, and I felt 20 again, bold and radiant. Unstoppable. Shortly after the runway video of my fashion show went viral online, people were moved by my refusal to conform to gender norms and my decision to live my life on my own terms. I saw James in the front row, and his eyes were full of pride and love. Instantly, my heart began to beat like a girl in love for the first time, referring to me as the vintage goddess, but we didn't anticipate that James would also become well known. A photographer's picture of him in the front row, his eyes glimmering with admiration as he watched me walk the runway, went viral on social media, and Chris also shared a video of James rushing around backstage, assisting me with everything from shoes to accessories. When James and I read that one, we looked at each other and started laughing quietly. It was heartwarming and a little strange. After that, we were invited to more and more fashion events, and time went by without lowering the light in our eyes. One day, I saw Rachel again at another vintage fashion show. The audience was still seated when she abruptly emerged from a corner and dropped to the ground, her knees in front of me. It had been another 6 months since we last saw her, and she looked completely different. Her hair was unkempt, her face was haggard, and her eyes were much thinner than before. Her voice was already breaking when she said, "Mom, Dad," and then, as if recalling something, she spun around and yelled, "Come on, Owen, say hello to Grandma and Grandpa." She had brought Owen along. But the boy clung to the wall and sobbed uncontrollably, screaming, "I don't want them." Grandpa Jay and Grandma Anna Rachel tried to stop him, but he wouldn't stop, so she pushed and shoved him, even hitting him in desperation. Owen's sobs became louder, echoing across the now empty runway venue, and the chaotic scene immediately attracted attention from everyone around them, who were whispering and pointing. I froze for a second, but as I considered it more, I realized that David had always been cocky and impulsive when chasing shortcuts and that he had been arrested for bribery and corruption 6 months prior. With the assistance of security personnel, we were able to finally get Rachel and Owen into a quiet backstage lounge away from the noise from the north. They had been using our accounts to build credit, grease palms, and curry favor instead of doing things correctly for years. I had warned him once to do what you can do and not try to fake your way through everything, but he simply sneered. That's such old school thinking these days. If there's a shortcut, only a fool wouldn't take it. I can still clearly remember that moment and the cold chill that crept through me. Rachel wept because he knew trouble was coming, so he pulled the same ruse once more to get a city development project. He even mortgaged their house to get a loan and make connections. He got the contract, but he ignored the work, drowning in dinners and alcohol. The project collapsed under his poor management, resulting in massive financial losses. The neighbors chat behind my back, and the kids at school tease Owen, saying, "I'm falling apart, Mom, Dad. He's just a kid, and that environment is toxic for him. I want to bring him here to live with you." Her eyes were full of hope, and James calmly replied, "Didn't Owen say he loves being with his real grandparents? Well, now that your little family is back together, it seems like a perfect fit." Rachel panicked, and Dad doesn't know how to care. James shook his head indifferently, "But that's your problem if his grandparents are irresponsible. As his mother, it's your responsibility to be more responsible. They don't even love him, and they don't know what he's allergic to. The last time he had a severe reaction to nuts, he went into shock, and they weren't even home, so they left him alone. James stays stable, and when the house is put up for auction, you'll get whatever's left over, which should be enough for you and your son to get by. David's childhood home is still there, so you won't end up on the streets. The loan David took is coming due, and I have no way to pay it back. The banks are going to foreclose on the house where Owen and I are supposed to live." Rachel's face went pale as anger and despair battled behind her eyes. She turned to me in tears and asked, "Mom, please say something." I gave her a blank look and said, calm and clear, your father's right. Rachel froze in place and realized that this time there would be no turning back. She covered her mouth and fled outside sobbing. The media, as usual, was quick to grab a story the moment Rachel James and I went viral again after someone at the fashion show kneeled in front of me. However, this time, the praise was overshadowed by criticism. The warriors bombarded the internet with condemnation, claiming that in today's world of exorbitant living expenses and oppressive pressure, young people were already overburdened, juggling careers and parenting, and that even the slightest assistance from the elderly was insufficient. As these voices grew louder, some people who once referred to me as the vintage goddess became quiet. Parents, whether it's preparing dinner or picking up a child from school, could make a huge difference, but what about us? They claimed that we were selfish, choosing comfort and leisure while ignoring our daughters' struggles. The tide of support gradually turned into a wave of judgment, but in the midst of the chaos, a different kind of voice subtly started to emerge. These were people closer to our age, people who, like us, had been tethered. They even started to doubt themselves, wondering what it would be like if their own parents did the same, letting go and stepping back from family obligations. Unpaid caregivers who wash dishes, change diapers, and gradually transfer savings to their adult children's lives are unable to even enjoy a pleasant supper or purchase a new dress without first assessing their children's mood. Started to voice that it was our responsibility to raise children, but does it imply that we must also be free servants for the rest of our lives? That remark struck a strong chord with nannies' personal chefs, even after they've established their own families. What started with a whisper became a growing chorus, a subtle but noticeable change in the public's perception. James initially expressed concern about me because he thought the emotional whiplash from love to fury would be too much for me to handle, but I wasn't worried. I just grinned and stated we had no intention of becoming well known, and the acclaim we received was a lovely accident. Enough that I won't regret it if it disappears tomorrow, because there are still a ton of locations for us to discover. Even the most beautiful landscapes are merely stops along the journey where you can appreciate their beauty before continuing on. Life will always be ahead, therefore, clinging to it would just make you feel heavier, but just because we had discovered serenity didn't mean I decided to write an article, because I didn't want those nasty charges to go uncorrected for the 5 years that we lived there. Taking care of our daughter's family at home, never daring to spend money on ourselves because we were feeling upbeat, and as it was our wedding anniversary, we celebrated by purchasing a bottle of wine. What transpired was that we were continuously accused of being excessive and wasteful. Our money was completely depleted as they used our retirement accounts to purchase $5,000 luxury bags and $6,000 watches to sustain their way of life, but we received criticism for spending a few dollars on a bottle of wine at a discount, even though Rachel attempted to win us back, but it was still tainted with deceit masquerading as love, so we decided to leave rather than confront her of abandonment, but because we ultimately understood that entitlement is not filial piety and sacrifice is not love, when I typed those words, the anguish and memories had subsided, leaving only clarity. Oddly enough, even felt somewhat appreciative of Rachel and David's deeds as they allowed James and me to finally break. We entered a new phase of life that was entirely our own, free from the worry of aging, illness, and dying alone. Notify us. Chris submitted a comment underneath the story after I published it. On his time spent living close to us, the quiet moments when I hung laundry in the mornings, and the early mornings when James prepared breakfast. Garden, the pictures he took of me grinning in the sun while wearing an old frock. Said that they didn't leave anyone behind, they just discovered how to defend themselves, and suddenly the rage in the comments started to fade. One message in particular stood out among the responses: will you still believe that your child's decision was the right one if you become a parent and they treat you in the same manner? Self-centered, as we only choose to stop giving after being exhausted, rejected, and thrown away. Putting more of ourselves aside, we still have the freedom to live the life we desire as we age.